Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we've got 4 presentations, and the last one by Dan Miles, just to let you know, is going to be a recorded one, which will play on the screens. He's not going to be present for it. So, first speaker this afternoon, Helen Spencer, ScARF Project Manager, The Future. Helen.
Right, thank you very much. Right, yeah, so hopefully I'm going to set the scene of some of the things we've got planned in the next 6 months, year, 2 years, and then we'll be hearing about a couple of projects that we're hoping to start or have started again in the next couple of years as well. But then hopefully this will lead on to some productive discussion afterwards where we can all consider collectively the future of ScARF and discuss more some of the questions and provocations that have already been raised this morning. So this part of the day is very much about where we are going from here. So to bring everybody up to date, and spoiled earlier by Andy, the ScARF project is now funded by HES until 2026. So we've got 3.5 years of funding. And this is for 2 almost full-time members of staff working at the Society of Antiquaries of Scotland to manage the overall ScARF resource, to maintain the website, to oversee the various framework, regional and thematic projects in progress, and to apply for funding and get off the ground new projects as they come on board. The 2 remaining regional projects we've heard about, SURFA and the ScARF project, are due for completion over the next 18 months or so. And we also have an application funding submitted to HES at the moment to start the next regional project, that of the Clyde Valley, which you'll hear more about from Gavin later this afternoon. So we're now starting to work on the plans for the remaining regional research framework projects with an aim, as outlined in Scotland's Archaeology Strategy, to have them all at least started by 2026. We're maybe slightly behind because of the couple of COVID years where we weren't able to get projects off the ground or apply for funding for new projects. But we do have a draft plan in place for the Southwest, which is the Ayrshires and Dumfries and Galloway. And then we've still got the Forth Valley region and Fife as well to work on. And then the northeast of Scotland, which is Moray, Aberdeenshire and Angus, plus Dundee as well, which Dundee is a tricky one, fitting a bit in Fife and Angus, and for various reasons, we're sort of working through how quite that's going to work. Some work was started in the northeast on a framework some years ago, but lack of resources and COVID in more recent years has meant this particular project needs to be picked up again. These are just some interesting stats about the ScARF project over the past few years. We've had over the 10 years, well, there's a minimum of 600,000 website visits. We don't know all the stats because, like I said, there was a break in sort of the management of ScARF for various short periods of time. We've got 234 case studies. The resource is now massive in terms of over 1,700 web pages. So, as mentioned before, so we've had a number of ScARF evaluations over the past couple of years. The first in 2019 was commissioned by ScARF ourselves, but carried out independently by Joe Robertson to find out what we were doing well and where we needed to improve, and to inform us of the plans for the next 5 years. And we also regularly review stats, things like Google Analytics, in terms of how our ScARF website is used. And then this was followed by a review by HES in 2020-21, which again I think many of you were involved with or were asked questions about, which looked much more at how ScARF was used by the sector and, importantly, at that stage, how ScARF could and should be funded in the future. So both reviews confirmed how widely across the sector ScARF was used, from a range of things, project proposals, funding applications, professional development, more and more use in local planning, development, commercial archaeology. ScARF's been used to inform archaeological work, jumpstart research projects, help access a large amount of funding over the years. And, as we've heard, it's a great resource for students and amateurs and community people to find out more about the archaeology of Scotland. And positive news, a 98.5% of respondents said that the resource was good to excellent. As part of the review by HES, this is where the case was made that ScARF was such an integral part of the sector, of the Scottish archaeology sector, that it needed to have more long-term funding. So this is where we eventually got our 4-year funding agreement from 2022 to 2026 which gives us a bit more stability over the next few years and enables us to plan a bit more. So these are just some of the words that came up most. I tried to do a fancy word cloud, but didn't quite manage it. But time and time again in the reviews. The quality and reliability of the information and resource was seen as key. It needs to remain being high quality. It needs to be underpinned by good data, as we've heard. There are quotes such as, it's held up across Europe as what can be accomplished by a nation for archaeology, and it's something that, again, as we've heard, has been emulated by lots of different groups as well. What came across, that there was a wish very much for the resource to be more consistent, both in layout and tone. People wanted it to be more practical to use. They wanted to be better connected with other parts of the sector, particularly the planning applied archaeology sector. Part of the review was still done when we had the old website, which by then was very clunky, and we've tried to address some of these issues with the new website, and we're still working on many of these things as we speak. And some of these you'll hear a bit more about, particularly from Dan at the end of the day. So making the website more accessible for all users was also raised as very important, and we still have work to do in this regard. Certainly the most recent research frameworks, we're making progress, so we're trying to make them more easily readable. We're working on the clarity and readability of the text, using copy editors as much as possible to review it. We're using alt text for images and trying to take into account the use of screen readers, so people who need to use screen readers. So, for example, trying to use shorter sentences, rejigging the way we reference the bibliography and things like that. And we've also been creating glossaries as well, and having more and more case studies. So Highlands had 80, nearly 80, just above 80 case studies, which are really accessible ways in for people to access the ScARF website. And we're trying to promote those more and more. And then people can then, hopefully, once they've read a case study, can dive in much more to the detail. So from these reviews, going forward, we decided we had 4 key things to work on in the sort of short to medium term. So these were website and accessibility, updating the old and creating the new frameworks, maintaining the quality and particularly improving research questions. And finally, there was a wish, a desire from our evaluations to make ScARF a much more wider used community resource. So, just as alluded to in the previous slide, the website and accessibility came strongly in the evaluations. And like most of you hopefully have seen, we have got a brand new website. It's now based on a different server. We keep it up to date. We keep it usable. We're not having the tech problems we have. And importantly, it's got the technology behind it to make us do lots more things in different ways for the website. So. More user-friendly and accessible. We're going to be talking later about the rollout of the UK Research Framework Network and how ScARF fits into this. We're looking to improve searchability. I was hoping to be able to show you some of this yet, but it's not quite there technically yet, but we'll be able to cross-link between frameworks across the whole of the UK. Creating more links between local HERs, OASIS, ADS, and other resources, and improve and make more interactive and updatable our maps, bibliography, and links, etc. And again, having a ScARF resource now, myself and Jen working on the project, means we will be able to update the data sheets and we will be able to update the maps to try and keep it much more current. One of the key things was to make the questions clearer and to link them with the reporting of archaeological work via OASIS. So as you'll see in PCARF and HIARF, we have research priorities and questions. So I appreciate these are too small to see, but we have both priorities or agenda, which is what archaeologists or researchers should or could be doing to help them answer the key questions. So 4.6 here is to undertake more remote surveys and LiDAR in the region to look for Bronze Age settlement. So that's a methodological thing which is being recommended. Oops, sorry. And then the questions are more specific. So what are the research questions we're trying to answer? Are there any fortified sites in the region of Bronze Age date? Are there any pre-Iron Age cranogs in the area? So we're sort of splitting out the agenda, the methodological from the research-specific questions. And Dan will be showing you a bit more about how this is all going to work. But by doing this, there's lots of technology stuff behind it that makes us able to link to OASIS, OASIS V, which will then also enable us to update questions as research is done to take on, tackle, answer any of these questions. It's already launched in England, but coming to Scotland any minute. I was hoping to say next week, but it might be another week or so yet. OASIS V is the main way for archaeological work to be reported in the UK, and it will now ask anyone reporting work how their work, if their work has helped to answer any research question. So it's mainly used by the commercial sector, but can also be used to report any archaeological work by academic projects, community groups, and in Scotland links directly to Discovery and Excavation in Scotland. And like I say, Dan will be giving us a re-demonstration of this later today. But what crucially it will mean is that we, at ScARF, will be able to use any updates to the questions, any work that's been carried out to add information, any links to data published on ADS or elsewhere to keep the ScARF updated, so it will not be as static as it has been in the past. And we'll also be able to, as part of this new research framework network, search across UK frameworks. So if you're interested in Roman presence in northern Britain, you could look at the Perth and Kinross framework, South East Scotland, North East England, and the forthcoming Antonine Wall framework, for instance, that we're working on, all in one place. So like I said, we're finishing our plans for the remaining regional projects, and we're also going to be working out a plan for renewing and reviewing our existing questions and to update them where appropriate. The idea is to work with the regional research frameworks on roughly a 5-year cycle. So there will be an idea to update, review the questions every 5 years at least to try and make sure they do remain up to date. Maybe not quite as often as Andy would like, but... So, and in addition to our regional projects, there are also a number of other thematic projects that ScARF's been involved with and look hopefully likely to be hosted on our platform and be part of ScARF. As mentioned, the next framework we're currently working on is the Antonine Wall World Heritage Site Research Framework. This has been in development now for quite a few years as part of the World Heritage Project and has recently been completed. So it's now being edited and we'll be adding to our pages starting next month with hopefully a launch maybe in the spring of next year, fingers crossed. And this will be our first World Heritage framework on the website. But we hope also to work with other World Heritage sites to make ScARF available to them as a place to share and use their research frameworks as well. And another thematic project we're currently working on or with is the INCA, the International Network for Contemporary Archaeology project, funded for development by the Royal Society of Edinburgh. I will be hearing more about this project from Alex later. And over the past year or so, I've always also had discussions with various people about potential useful thematic frameworks, for example, for crop marks, for industrial heritage. There's been discussions again with Ireland regarding Boyne to Brodgar project or similar. And as Simon said, we've been helping Discovery programme in Ireland with their plans for a national strategic framework. And I was helping them last week or 2 weeks ago recruit for project staff to get that project off the ground. And another thematic framework is that of archaeological science. This was one of the early thematic frameworks that came out of 2012 ScARF, but clearly science has moved on absolutely dramatically since 2012, so it's out of date in many areas. And it was a key issue with our regional research frameworks not to keep reinventing the wheel, so to separate out the science and go back and review the 2012 science research framework. So we aim to be maybe more, I suppose, multidisciplinary. We want to focus more on the research questions than maybe the current science framework does. And we're going to be looking at sort of themes more, again, like people, landscapes, climate change, industry, etc. We started up the project last year, but it's been a bit of a struggle again with that C word to get everybody actively involved in the project. So lots of people really keen to help, but ultimately very short of time, especially with the new challenges in university teaching and the like. So I'll be trying to get this project back off the ground again in the next few months, the start of this year, to see hopefully how people are more fixed to help us look at redeveloping the science framework, which I think is a really crucial thing that needs doing. So the third theme coming out of our evaluation and what we should be doing better or what we should do more of is so the quality of frameworks and the research questions. Like in general, like I say, people were very happy with the quality. It was seen as something that was of high quality, it was well peer reviewed, it was trustable, and the idea, obviously we want to keep that. You know, we don't want to, I suppose, dumb down the word, it's the word people use, but we want to keep it high quality, use the data, but impartial and well-balanced. There was a desire from quite a few respondents to maybe have a more consistent format and sort of more editorial control so that it all fits together maybe better. And so in some ways, say with Highlands, where we have, and PCARF as well, where we have the themes running through the chapters, running through all the chronological periods, for instance, is one way to do this, to make it a bit more easy to work your way through if you're looking for particular information. And we're also working on development guidance of framing of questions. So what makes a good research question? Usually a question ends with a question mark. There's quite a lot of things in ScARF that don't end with a question mark. They're more of an idea or a theme. So certainly when we're putting the questions in, we want to have a good question that we can answer and sort of, will more radiocarbon dating of the Iron Age tell us more about the Iron Age? Well, yes. If the question ends with a yes or a no answer, it's probably not a good research question. So we're going to be issuing a bit more guidance and working on our research questions. And as I've said, we're going to be updating and working more with information from OASIS and DES and online publications. And finally, the other thing that did come out of the evaluations was we should make much more use of ScARF as a community and sector resource. People said there's so much information on ScARF, but who knows about it, which again has been touched on this morning. We need to make it more usable, of more relevance to the wider public, not just the sector. We need to maybe widen the groups involved in the creation of the frameworks, which again I would argue a lot of the regional ones have been doing, but maybe not enough. And we sort of do need to review who ScARF is designed for, who's intended to use it, and why are they using it. And again, hopefully this afternoon in discussion we'll be talking about some of these things, so we'll welcome all your ideas and thoughts. So we want to review who it was designed for, but we have lots of new questions now, compared to 2012 or even 2008. A lot of questions we're concerned with are things like place, local heritage, climate change. How does ScARF relate to those? How can ScARF input in those questions? I would say the original ScARF was not created necessarily to empower communities. It was more of a sector and academic exercise, which again is what we've heard about, maybe more of an academic an academic exercise than the rest of the sector. But it's certainly something that now we do need to have a dialogue about its purpose and its future direction, which I hope this event is the start of. Yeah, so just to round up, thankfully this is the last of me talking to you today. So these are sort of our plans for the future, so very much keep the state of understanding, impartial, well-balanced, accurate, making it maybe more consistent, being much a better repository to link to research resources, a place to share knowledge, skills and resources, and to make it of more use and relevance for everybody who may want to use ScARF. Yeah, I just round off the same as, again, quite a few of the speakers this morning said. The final thought is that the process of creating ScARF is often as important as the final project. Bringing people together with a common positive purpose. And as we've seen from this room, so many people from across the sector have been working on ScARF over the years and on its creation. And I can't imagine it'd be a really useful thing in hindsight. Maybe we should have had a board where people could have put, because we met at a ScARF meeting or we worked on a ScARF panel, this project came. It may not be a ScARF project, but so for example, in the Western Isles, the US Unearth project, an amazing project, but a lot of discussions for that came about by having the symposium in the Western Isles, and these other projects sort of came out of it, and it's something I would really like to capture a bit more about all these sort of tangential successes of ScARF over the years. Just before I finish, in case I don't get time at the end of the day, I just want to thank all of ScARF's authors and contributors over the years. I want to thank, obviously, our main funders, who are Historic Environment Scotland, who continue to fund both their main ScARF project at the Society, but also substantially fund the majority of our regional projects as well. And obviously, the last few years have been trickier for us all, dealing with COVID, and has put some projects on the back burner. But I'm sort of really looking forward to, with our new contract with HES, to sort of getting sort of back running, and putting into a lot of our plans into place over the next few months and years. So thank you very much.
Well, happy birthday, 10 years. What an amazing achievement. I'm going to reflect on what's been happening through the scoping phase of the Clyde Valley Archaeology framework, in fact, through that scoping phase, we had feedback. People think it might be a heritage framework could be useful, but that's another little thought. I'll also reflect from the perspective of a situated practitioner. You know, we've heard a few people mention about how difficult things have been in the past few years. We've heard issues of capacity in the sector. So I'm really going to frame this conversation from those realities. But one of those realities through that Clyde Valley Archaeological Research Framework scoping phase is that I live and work in the area for most of my life. Although I've been privileged to work all over Scotland in archaeological projects, the Clyde Valley area is where my community is in different ways. And as a father who've had people born in Glasgow and grandchildren now, it's great news, born in North Lanarkshire, this really matters to me in different ways. And it matters to me in the way that I think archaeology matters to people. It's relevant, it's powerful when people get involved in it. So at this time, when we look at the Clyde Valley region and the scoping phase, we were very much framed on those realities that people are facing in that part of the world. It's the second longest, I think, river in Scotland. It's in the sort of imagination of Scotland in different ways. The industries of Clyde, second city of the empire, all the realities of material culture leaving and all sorts of goods and materials coming in. And as we're well aware, with some of the critical thinking that's been taking place in museums and the heritage sector more broadly, there's also a very important decolonial perspective in relation to some of these issues. And as that lower marker is transcribed, 1732, the river itself has an agency and an entity in this part of the world that is a really big part of what binds those communities, even in this day. So one of the things we are interested in is what it does it mean to be a member of the communities of the Clyde in the past and as we look forward in the future. Well, there are realities though. 8 local authorities are potentially what we are going to try and address with this framework process. And it has been challenged, this area, in terms of the level of support that might be there in the past. OASIS have done amazing work, and they continue to do remarkable work in that development-led context and with very limited resources. But these regions collectively have not had the benefits, such as other parts of Scotland, to have a regional forum or regular kind of capacity building at that regional scale. So this is one of the things we recognise and really hope that the research framework process can start to build that capacity as we go forward. So there's certain challenges there, practically, about working across those regions, and the fact that that coverage in terms of HER and local authority support is not consistent across at least 2 of those local authorities as well. But we know other parts of the world have worked systematically at this scale to look at big strategic problems and big strategic challenges, whether it relates how the river relates to the marine system. So again, the broader Clyde catchment of the Clyde is something we're aware of. And again, I think Becky was talking about the nested systems that you were working within. We're aware of the river, but we're also aware of how those cultural traditions go out with through the Firth of Clyde, but across to Ireland, across the Atlantic as well. There's stories and relationships there that are both political, strategic, and cultural in various ways. So perhaps then a research framework looking at the archaeological issues can have the same degree of relevance and significance in the context of that cross-local authority working. And as part of the process of kind of exploring what might be possible and what would be welcomed by stakeholders and collaborators and partners in this context, we looked at some of the fundamental issues. We have about 4% of Scotland's 4% of Scotland's land covered by these local authorities, and over 30% of the population there. It's a huge challenge, but also a huge opportunity. But some of the greatest deprivation in Scotland is in many other places, rural and other cities, but the greatest concentration in some of those local authorities are there. So maybe the responsibility we have, and maybe the opportunity to see why archaeological research is relevant in this context, is something we've got to build into the process, which is what we've been doing. Those other baseline issues, there is actually a significantly higher proportion by area of heritage assets, despite the small land mass. So that's a significant opportunity. But there's also about 25% of the nationally important collections in terms of museums are there as well. So again, we're very keen that we work across archaeological collections, as well as archaeological sites, and as well as archaeological landscapes, and all the ways that archaeology manifests. But museum collections are particularly significant in this context, potentially. Finally, looking at the spend, we have in the 8 local authorities received proportionally significant levels of National Lottery Heritage Funding spending, but it has been largely on capital projects around about museums and built heritage. And inevitably then it's gone to places like Glasgow a lot of the time. So where resource, where funding goes strategically as we look forward is really important. And actually, just a little aside I found interesting, industrial heritage, which you think would be one of the most important storylines for communities, one of the most important sets of remains we have, has traditionally received disproportionately low funding, I would argue. And finally, just as another kind of tool to make sure we're looking at these, the RSE Heritage Index, which I'd recommend to those of you who haven't seen it. We do rank in a number of those local authorities in the criteria of particularly activities relating to historic environment quite low. So work to be done is the headline. And in that context, we undertook consultation and 3 workshops with a range of agencies and organisations in both the museum sector, developer sector, and local authority. We've been working very closely in partnership with, obviously, Helen and the team at ScARF, University of Glasgow, with Dr. Kenny Brophy as another partner in the process, and we're in close collaboration with OASIS as well to make sure that what emerges is useful in that context as well and potentially allows innovation. Inevitably, though, like all of us, COVID impacted and we had to go digital. However, that has been a remarkable journey we've all been on, and we'll continue to build that on as we go forward. Jumping into things like Miro workshops and Mentimeter was something none of us expected 2 years ago. We framed those discussions around about a series of kind of conversational issues, working across the range of archaeological heritage, shall we say. What are the kind of research outcomes that could be developed collaboratively? We recognise that both for individuals and communities in the Clyde region, the stories we tell from that research are potentially as important as the research. So who tells those stories and what stories we frame is something we're really concerned about. And then also the realities, as we've seen some of the other presentations, that analog digital outreach and communication is a key part of how we take forward this development phase of a research framework. And we genuinely asked the people we talked with in that scoping phase, is a research framework going to be helpful? Is it going to be useful? So very quickly, I'm sorry about the size of these things, but it just gives you a sense of the kind of sort of feedback we were getting. And the kind of headlines that we were getting about how could an audit and activity gaps in the knowledge be addressed? How can we support better research outcomes were the kinds of questions we were looking to. Additionally, we were looking at issues and opportunities in those contexts, what are the needs, what are the challenges, what are the current realities and constraints, and what prevents us doing more were the kinds of questions we were asking. And we wanted to understand better what would people like to achieve individually, collectively, in the short, medium and long term. So we got quite a lot of response in relation to these, and I'm not going to go into detail here. But there is a report that we can share with you. I don't know if it's available on the ScARF site yet. Yeah, so we should do that as an action. And between those 2 workshops and a 3rd workshop we ran, it really produced a series of insights that I think are going to inform the design process. So some of the key insights that came across, that there was clearly support across the different areas of practice, museums, local authority, units, 3rd sector, to work across those areas of practice and find ways that we could support each other. And maybe one of the key things that did come across in this region in particular is that need to build those linkages, to develop skills in a range of different areas and build capacity. So just as a little aside, we know many of the local museums have significant archaeological collections, but they don't have the skill or capacity to really understand what they've got. There's a huge opportunity there through potentially creating volunteer opportunities and building capacity. It was clear, though, and we asked the question, do you want this to be an expert-led? And it came across clearly that there was a sense that they wanted to be facilitated by experts, supported by experts, but to go through a process that was a bottom-up approach with community groups, with other organisations that support capacity building, and to focus on a range of different outcomes. So one of the things we're trying to design and develop is this kind of participatory archaeology model in the process, and I'll come back to that. And the most fundamental thing I think came across was the idea that at this stage, the legacy, the research action plan is what we should be planning for now. Not as a bolt-on after we've done our audits, not as a bolt-on after we've done formulated research questions, but we really need to think about how we deliver research collaboratively in the long term. So maybe it touches on some of the other issues that we've heard today. There has been an approach already to look for quick wins, because we're going to have to be pragmatic for all the reasons we've heard. So just a little example, a conversation between Helen and Derek Alexander led us to realise that the work that had been done by Glasgow Museums, Glasgow Life, in 2014, 2015 was no longer available online. It was an audit and baseline process that resulted in some remarkable reports, synthetic reports to come out, and they are now up on the Clyde Valley Archaeological Research Framework holding page. That's the example of the quick wins we need to find to build linkages and to start to ensure we're not duplicating what's already been done. 2004 was the last time there was a West of Scotland archaeology conference or gathering. 2004, due to issues of capacity, issues of not being able to collaborate across those 8 local authorities. And maybe that's a quick win as part of what we try and do as we go forward. And these are the kinds of sort of things we were learning and understanding as a group through that scoping phase. There were areas that we could really mobilise around very efficiently as part of a development process as well. So the plans currently are, there's an application, as Helen's already said, with Historic Environment Scotland to support a development phase. We very much want to go through a balanced and phased approach of bringing partners and bringing community groups into a design process about the nature of the research framework within what already currently exists. We're not going to completely reinvent the wheel, but we want to make sure what comes out is supported and is usable across the different domains in the Clyde region, the museum, the development-led, and academic and third sector, and find participatory methods to collaborate in that context. There's a plan for a steering group, an advisory group, as it says there, but 3 members of staff across 8 local authorities. I think that's going to be a huge challenge over 3 years, but with 3 members of staff, we might have a chance of doing something with our partners and with our groups to build the capacity as we look forward. Those staff, 1 would be focused on community engagement, and 2 would be focused on the research process. And hopefully that will keep a balance in terms of some of the issues we're focusing on. I suppose looking forward though, and I'm not going to talk much longer because I just wanted to introduce what's happening and what we've achieved so far. It's the start of a conversation, it's the start of a negotiation, and it's the start of a recognition that we really have to be honest about, with those issues that we've heard from other presenters, what can we realistically do at this time that addresses where and how we live just now. That list of issues there are things that I hear people talking in the sector about what we deliver on, and we can deliver on all of these. And research and action research and collaborative research can do remarkable things, but it's the process of research that does it. Not the questions, not the bits of paper that come out, it's the collaborative work that delivers a series of outcomes and a series of capacities for us as human beings, as a society, and as a range of organisational partnerships that is really fundamental as we go forward. So the final 2 words I've got there, and we've already heard other people speaking about it, capacity. Well, I think we talked earlier, we probably will never find additional capacity, but what we need to do is create capacity by working smarter, not duplicating, making sure we're linking up, and making sure we're finding real opportunities for those quick wins to build momentum and a sense of direction to get that broader support we need. And I think We didn't push through in these circumstances. We struggled through with COVID. We adjusted and we modified, and I could see the pressure that people were under when we were consulting them. We have to go forward with care. We have to go forward with a realism about what we can achieve and why we're trying to achieve it. And perhaps then we will be able to answer that question, why is archaeology relevant at this time? Because it presents much more than just knowledge. It presents a series of practices that make a difference to people's lives. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I'm the last live person here. I'll do my best to keep you awake. Thank you very much, ScARF, and happy birthday for inviting me along. It's lovely to be here at a birthday celebration, live and direct. I want to speak on behalf of the International Network for Contemporary Archaeology in Scotland. I'll give you some background about our project, and I keep using the word our a lot because it is a big, broad, collaborative project. It's not just me. I want to explain how it is developing, and it is still developing, and where we would like to go from here. But channeling Jeff, who isn't here right now, quick quiz. And I'd like to give you a question, think about it and we'll come back to it later on. What is the population of Scotland in 2021? So think about that. But first, like all things archaeological, we've got to have a definition because there's some words on here that might not mean very much. If only for you to chew over, spit out, or maybe expand upon. So here is one of the more recent researches, the definition of contemporary archaeology. Rodney Harrison and John Schofield, who some of you have come across, professors at UCL and York Universities, published in 2009, saying that the archaeology of the recent and contemporary past, that is the archaeology of places and events that relate to the period of the recent or living memory, is a dynamic new field which engages critically with what it means to be us, with the politics of late modernity, and with the nature, shape, and relevance of archaeology as a contemporary research practice. We can have a whole session on whether we agree with that or not, but I'd like to move on to thinking a little bit more around this idea. So what happened? A small number of people have already been thinking and practicing contemporary archaeology. We're talking post-processualism here, okay? Interpretive archaeologies, if you like, or post-interpretive archaeologies. But we've been thinking about it for some time now. Think about William Rathje digging up rubbish tips in upstate New York. That was over 50 years ago, guys. That's older than I am. So that's ancient history, almost. So when Rodney Harrison wrote, one of the central challenges for archaeology over the coming decades will be to find ways to engage with emerging contemporary socio-material phenomena, and hence with issues of both contemporary and future ecological, social, political, and economic concerns. That really resonated with some of us who are sitting in pubs or in muddy puddles, digging holes, or elsewhere online as well. So it resonated with our research, with our approaches to archaeology, and our beliefs as well. Yeah, in a church, we can say that, can't we? So how did we start going about exploring what this could mean for Scotland? Back in 2017, a few of us started to meet up under the guise of the Third Millennium Disorganisation. Yes, this was part of a reaction against the First Millennium Studies group. I'll come on to that. Also, we saw a gap left after the post-medieval ScARF panel. The contemporary had not been addressed. That is not a criticism. But we took that stance for a reason, to consider why it was that archaeologists were concerned with the contemporary past in Scotland. We're still thinking through that reason. Eventually, we applied to the Royal Society of Edinburgh to fund a series of research workshops back in 2018-19, and the workshops explored themes such as art as the new oil, hence the picture on the left here. We went to Aberdeen and we took part, we were participants in the New Art Street Art Festival. For those of you who don't know it, happens every year. It started in Stavanger and then come over to Aberdeen. Stavanger and Aberdeen, big oil centres. Our intention was to explore art and archaeology, graffiti and street art as material evidence of contemporary archaeology, and to consider how creative thinking could potentially support Scotland in a post-oil age. We were participants in it. We took part in the events, we gave papers, we drew on walls. I don't know whether anyone picked up a spray can or not. I hope they did at the time as well. But we were part of the events, and we were part of the effects of the events as well, which for contemporary archaeologists is an important part. We had another workshop which was in Orkney. The theme there was climate change, renewables and future archaeologies, with the aims of exploring the effects of climate change on contemporary island communities. We've heard a lot about that already from Becky. Discovering and discussing adaptive archaeological methodologies to document approaches to contemporary issues. And we were considering the creative turn in our 21st century landscapes, from new museums to personal online archives, social media archives as well. So the workshops led on to further submission for more funding from the Royal Society of Edinburgh. Yes, they were very kind to us. We moved from those workshops into an international research network, and that's between 2021 and 2023. But the pandemic hit, and we had to sustain a network that comprised over 30 participants from more than 12 countries. Yes, I know this is meant to be international. That's not massive. 12 countries isn't great. Yes, we haven't achieved that yet. We're still trying. But it included, and this is quite important, I think, here, it's included archaeologists, artists, heritage practitioners, community participants, activists, ethnographers, social geographers, and of course, ScARF. Thank you. So we were really being, what's the word, tentacular in our approaches. We were moving beyond the academy, beyond the traditional network, if you like. Our aims were to explore what is a research network in our digital and disrupted world, by gathering practices and methods and examples of contemporary archaeology of and in Scotland. We tried mass meetings online, breakout sessions, quizzes. Remember the Zoom quizzes back in early 2021? Sorry, 2020. Competitions and other digital methodologies to engage and sustain the network. We've had some ups and we've had some downs. Currently, we are meeting online, but beginning to meet in person now. We've got some new micro events coming up. We were meant to have one last week when it was Day of the Dead. We were going to go and look at some ghost signs around Edinburgh and then celebrate Day of the Dead with our Mexican colleagues as well. But the weather was awful, so we didn't. But we will. But we will do it. And yeah, for archaeologists to say it was awful, it must be really. It was really bad. We're exploring creative methods and we're gathering examples that tie to the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals. I think that's a crucial part to remember here. Over the past 12 months, we have recognized that during our information gathering and sharing, there are already several amazing projects and initiatives that are ongoing and indicate that this arena of archaeology is expanding already in Scotland. For example, we contributed to the Highlands Research Framework. Thank you, Susan, so much for accepting our crazy words. And more recently to the Perth and Kinross Regional Framework. Thank you, Davey. And we're currently contributing to the Clyde and the Islands frameworks as well. And if you've got any other frameworks you want to help with, we'll help. Yes, Becky, yes, thank you. We'll be there. Dr. Antonia Thomas, who's been mentioned earlier, who lives and works in Orkney at the University of Highlands and Islands, developed and leads the only master's course in contemporary art and archaeology, where students consider the many relationships between art and archaeology as well. Not comparing the two, but how they work together. This is crucial. This is going beyond archaeology and beyond art as well. Dr. Kenny Brophy, who we all know and love, runs an honours course at the University of Glasgow, and that's called Contemporary and Future Archaeologies as well. So that's engaging the next group and next participants in archaeology, the new learning generation, which is so crucial here. I say this now as a bearded old man. Archaeology Scotland developed a transformative project with community partners to relocate and excavate the first Hampden football ground. I'm sure you've heard all about it, as part of their New Audiences project. Not only was the project focused on a contemporary subject, but the people who were involved were not all white, pale, stale, and male like me. There are many more projects that have focused their archaeological imaginations on the present and the recent past. So this is not something that is new to Scotland. Don't be afraid. We're here to help. But maybe it is something that we can reflect on and consider as another model for present and future archaeological endeavours. I'm not advocating for radical change, although that's not beyond the realms of this work. But we recognise that contemporary archaeology in Scotland needs, what does it need? Needs to be inclusive, creative, a little disruptive, and something that takes us beyond our traditional tropes and boundaries. So where do we go from here? Well, thankfully, ScARF is one of our many partners that we have been working with during the Royal Society of Edinburgh Network, and we will continue to work together into 2023 and hopefully beyond. As the network funding draws to a close in October 2023, we will begin to plan for the next phase of the development of, I've got written down here, a framework for contemporary archaeology in Scotland, but I think that's wrong. I think we need to think together what is and how we do this, and the framework is not necessarily the right word for it. Clearly, this can draw on other ScARFs. The carved stones is a brilliant example, and Sally, the words you didn't use there, but were ringing in my head, was design-led. This is a design-led process, design thinking. And given the nature of the subject and the broader reach and engagement with partners across the globe, we will need to develop novel and appropriate approaches. We hope this will enable people and organisations alike to explore new methodologies and, in brackets, archaeological perspectives that address international, socio-political and environmental challenges facing Scotland today and in the future. So just before I finish, anyone got the answer to my question? What was the population in 2021 of Scotland? Hello. And where did you get that from? Off the top of your head. Brilliant. A non-Google archaeologist who didn't grab the data straight off their phone. Thank you very much. You're absolutely nearly right. 5,479,900 compared with 5,062,000 and blah, blah, blah in 20 years ago. Where we get this data from is really crucial. You got it from the top of your head. But there is so much digital data out there. So are we going to be training the next archaeologist digging holes, or are we going to be training them excavating the internet? So the data is a crucial part of our understanding of the contemporary. So I'd like to leave you with one soft and fuzzy thought, which has been a strong strand throughout our work. Gavin's mentioned it. We recognise that archaeology of and in the contemporary past is an unfolding notion. It's not fixed, but it hopes to provide a caring and sensitive approach that considers archaeology as part of a wider health and well-being agendas as well. That is open to people within and beyond the disciplines, and it also demands new ways of thinking about and undertaking archaeological practices. That's the soft, fuzzy side. Plus, it's a bit of a wake-up call, guys. Archaeology, as we've heard today, is political with a small p, but it's also under threat, which ScARF can help recognise, develop, and coordinate some of those approaches as well. So let's work together on this. Thank you.
My name is Dan Miles. I'm the Research Infrastructure Advisor at Historic England. responsible for developing research frameworks in England. Really sorry not to be with you all today, tomorrow. This is take 23, I think, of this presentation. It's an absolute mare having to record something. And I apologise for the next 10 minutes of you all in a live event watching me drone on. But I will promise to keep it quick and short. And it's a real shame that I can't be there with the cake and the celebration and going out tonight. But logistical reasons has prevented me from coming. I just really want to say thank you to Helen for inviting me. And really, this is just a sort of a short presentation to just think through some of the processes that we've been through for developing the research framework platform, and some of the ideas about what makes it different to the old traditional way of doing research frameworks, and just thinking about how we can start developing more and thinking about the future development of it. So I'm hopefully you can see the screen. I've got the sort of the homepage of the network. It has a simple map interface. And I think I will start really by saying, you know, we've moved on a lot from the principles of research frameworks being developed back in '96 with Adrian Olivier's work. And for the last sort of 20 years, we've been much more of the sort of the publications in England, the monograph, huge volumes of information, fantastic things, but have provided us with the issues of how do we keep them up to date. And this is one of the core principles when we did the review back in 2013 of research frameworks and where they want to go. This is one of the core things. The research frameworks for us in England is primarily focused about supporting the planning system and getting research value, furthering understanding from the planning system. So it's really got that focus of working with the commercial contractors and how they can get that sort of research approach to the work. That's where it all came from in terms of sort of the principles of what we wanted to do. We looked at different things as part of the review. We had different ways, and of course, one of the main systems out there, the main different ones, was the new ScARF research framework, which was fantastic. Exactly what we wanted, online, accessible. It's a wiki base. It could be edited, and so that sort of really was one of the sort of the principles for where we are now in terms of the research framework network. In England, having said that, we don't have a national England research framework. It's much more regional and local. So there's a whole plethora of these different ones everywhere. But part of it was by bringing it all together in one place. It makes it more accessible. We knit together that sort of that national perspective of the historic environment over England. So really, just to start, the main idea of this was we need to get it online, accessible, updatable, and really the key is to make it interoperable. Amongst the research frameworks itself, there is a research facility that's being developed at the moment where we'll be able to research across all the different frameworks to pick up information, pick up different research questions, but also wanted to think about how we can embed it into other systems that we use to manage the historic environment. In particular, the HERs in England or the SMRs in Scotland, and the OASIS reporting system. And I think this is really key for the approach we've gone for. So just as a very quick one, you know, we've just shown you the map. On the platform now, there's a number of national and regional frameworks in England and Scotland, specialist frameworks, and we've got links to international frameworks. Not all of these are on the platform, some of these are links. What's an interesting development we're recently looking at in England, and it's part of a sort of a project looking at archaeological archives and thinking about the research value of archaeological archives, is the Wiltshire Museum of doing a sort of a pilot project to create its own research agenda and put it on the platform. So that will be setting out the key questions on its collections, and linking to see what its collections will be able to contribute to in terms of, say, the Southwest England or the Stonehenge and 8B research frameworks. And this will be an interesting way to see how we can sort of work across from museum collection-based research into academic research and into the planning system and the investigations and how it all links through. One of the key things with this is going to be OASIS, because OASIS is a system in England that will be linking up the HER, the museum, and the contractor. So that's just as a start. So the principles of it was to put it all on a website. It's a WordPress website. It's easy to use. Even I can use it. Fantastic. That was a deliberate choice. But and the majority of the content is pages, text, and images. But the main difference is that any of the research questions and any of the strategies or the agendas or any things like that are all managed in a database. And I'll just give you an idea. You might as well use the tab. So let's have a quick look at the Northwest Research Framework. I'm not going to delve on it, you know, go and have a look. There's lots of different types and they've done it in different ways, but the principles of resource assessments, the text where people can actually comment and add information in a controlled manner, and then the research agenda. And I'll just have a look at an example of the Roman one. And let's have a quick look at, military activity R11. It doesn't matter if you can't read all of it, but it just gives you the idea that this is a research question. It has its own URI, so its own individual link, which is really important to be able to people be able to use that link and download it into their databases. We can link through, which we have to OASIS, which I'll explain in a minute. And it has that sort of we're moving forward into the world of linked data and things like that. So and that's far beyond my brain capacity, and that's why I leave the specialists for doing that. But it's the idea that each question is its own entity. It's in a database, it's managed, and we can also add metadata to be able to manage that. So is it active question? Who has the authority to change it? When was it accepted? And all that information is incredibly useful that we can pass on to different systems and move it around. Just to give you a quick look of what that looks like behind the scenes. So the front end is the large number of websites. Behind the scenes, there's all they all have their own databases. So let's have a look at the Northwest. Oh, I can do it that way, can't I? Dashboard. Let's just see, question, manage. Sorry, I'm just, as the usual one, local, just going to get that same question. There we go. And then you can just see behind the scenes, this is where the question is managed. So the people behind the scenes who manage the frameworks, the regional groups, the management teams can go in and they can add different things and different information. This is the metadata and the associated stuff. The important one here, for example, is the categories. So we tag each of the research questions or the strategies or the agenda items with labels that are associated with either, you know, the associated period or the monument type or the object type if it's about pottery or something, or also information, for example, about how that might contribute and how to answer the question. So it could be identifying Roman roads through aerial reconnaissance, through geophysical survey, where it is, the Northwest England, that sort of idea. All this information is generated from controlled vocabularies, and I'll just give you an idea of where they are. So behind the scenes here, so we import all the controlled vocabularies from the heritagedata.org, which is an initiative that is through the Forum of Information Standards and Heritage, FISH, that has the Welsh National Agency, Scottish National Agency, Peter McKee's involved in that, and ourselves in England, Historic England. So all those tags that are associated with monuments or archaeological sites come from there. Anything else that is not directly archaeological related, so for example, it could be population, migration, those themes of research, we pull those down from the art and architecture thesaurus at the Getty, and anything that is location, geographical, comes from the ONS and the Ordnance Survey. That's just really to show you the system, and I know it's a very quick run through, but it's important to show that, because it's the idea that we've moved completely away from that paper, and we've moved even away from that just web pages to the fact that it's databases underneath it, which gives us that richness and that value that we can actually start moving into and inputting it into different systems. One of the most important systems that we've done that with is the OASIS system, and I'm just going to give you a quick look at that now. The OASIS system is the main way that we report online on archaeological and other historic environment research that's been undertaken. Majority in England, that would be through the planning system. So you do your investigation, and as part of the sort of the sign off and part of the process, you submit, you do the reporting, and you go through, this is my site, this is where it is, this is the activity, the work undertaken, the results, and then you upload the report, and that goes to the Archaeological Data Services digital library, and it becomes publicly accessible. So what we wanted to do is embed the research framework questions into that system. So when people start writing about the results, and actually, rather than just copy paste, put it in, we can actually say, how have you contributed directly to the research framework questions that you've put as part of your WSI or your project design? That's important. So it's having that trail. So this is the form here, the results. It looks a bit different in Scotland, but the principle's the same. And so have your results contribute to a research framework. It's generated about where you are, because we're in Framingham, Suffolk, the east of England. It brings it up. You can start typing your research question that you know. You then can pick it and you add your question. Then you would then actually use the summary of the outcome, and you'd actually start typing what has the project contributed to. This is really, really important, and that interactiveness between the two. So this question is in the OASIS system. Wait a second, well, actually comes back and it brings it back onto the research framework platform. So this is the question here, the non-valley sites, with all the same information that I showed you a minute ago, with the categories here being shown. The why this is important with OASIS and with the whole system is the idea that we can now start embedding the research frameworks into different systems. We can start thinking much broader about just using them as references and saying, I want to find out fantastic information that's on there, give me a bit of background information for my desk-based assessment. Then I can identify my questions. These are the questions I'm going to use in my investigation. But by using the OASIS system and linking it to the reporting system, we can then show the value and the research value that those investigations have contributed to. And this, for me, is a really important step. It's not just about reporting on, we've done this, we did it here, it was great. We can actually show to funders, to developers, saying, the work that you funded is actually contributing to this question in this way, and you can create an audit trail. This is where we're moving forward to, and I think it's really fascinating, it's interesting. Also, the beauty of the system is because you can pull in different controlled vocabularies and link it to different things, we could start moving into different things. So, for example, looking at the museum one, we could then link the museum one into the Collections Trust and their database and their controlled vocabularies in the museum world. It could easily be pulled in data or information from, say, the natural environment. And so the potential is we can develop things in different ways. But I hope that just gives everyone an idea of the changes and where we're thinking, and I hope it is relatively of interest. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
I'm a member of a volunteer amateur group at Ancram in the Scottish Borders. We're often doing projects that are that begin by being or pursuing a community goal. And I'm trying to grasp how relevant ScARF or ScARF is to the work we are doing, and how, where and when we should be accessing it, and how it can help us.
Helen.
Well, ScARF itself is a work in progress, so it's not out there at the moment. But we're going to be having more events at the start of next year where we're trying to be getting more people involved. When the finished project is complete, we'll be having research questions and also the research priorities in terms of sort of things we should and could be doing. And that's where so communities can feed in terms of, we think this is a really important area of research for our local area, so for Ancrum and for your project, and obviously the work with the bridge that you've already done, and the work and the dendro work and everything else. But then also, what other questions do you want to find out? So these are all things we'd be inviting you and all other groups to get in touch with ScARF, join in the workshops for ScARF, and say, these are the things we're interested in finding out. Once things are in ScARF and it's launched as the website, like I say, people use these questions in a range of ways. They are useful for getting funding. So if you're looking for funding for anything, if a question is in ScARF, you've got to, somebody has said, the people who developed the framework have said, this is a really important thing that we need to find out answers to. And so you've got a ready-made thing to stick in your funding application. It's also, other people then get involved. You may get students who are interested in the project. So it's out there. So once you've got it, it can be used in a range of ways, sort of by the community groups. So I know, I think in the Highlands, you were looking at doing QR codes for some of the sites. Was this to link? So some of the case studies, for instance, you can go to, is it operational yet? Or yeah. So you can go to the museum now and QR code and go straight to some of the case studies in the Highland Archaeological Research Framework. So there's lots of different ways that it could be useful in future.
Hi, just to pick up on what Dan was saying, we're hoping to launch the new OASIS system early next month. Don't want to put any more definite dates on it because we've had so many postponements. What OASIS V will do, it'll replace the existing separate reporting systems for Discovery and Excavation in Scotland and the existing OASIS system. It'll be one form that both community researchers and professional archaeologists can report their information to. That information will then be taken by Archaeology Scotland to help create the Discovery and Excavation volume for the following year, and also, as Dan described, help answer the research questions as and when they're uploaded into the system. And we'll be rolling out a lot of training next year, so get in touch.
Yes, I think everyone will need training. That's very true.
Can I come in on that as well? Because I think Peter mentioned DES, and it's such an important resource that Archaeology Scotland has run for years. And certainly, I think, going to Andy's point about how do we have an iterative process, we're actually lucky in Scotland we do that with the DES compilation and publication process of field activities, but also a range of other archaeological research activities, be it relating to isotopes now, radiocarbon dates, student, projects. It's actually a really fantastic process we've been doing in Scotland for many, many decades and can only build on.
Sorry, I mean, it is and it isn't, because it doesn't really encapsulate interdisciplinary research that's being done in other areas that relates to the things that we're interested in. And I think, and it's not just about research that's coming from developer-led work either. So the risk, I understand what it is going to do, but I think there's lots of things it's not going to do. And I think that one of the key questions for us going forward is, how do we keep live the difference that research is making, including research that's interdisciplinary and relates to archaeology, such as heritage, for example. And one of the opportunities that I think that's lost in what I've just seen of OASIS is, and I'm picking up on, Andy's question, observations earlier on today. I'd like to know what questions the applied archaeologists are actually asking of the research. So why isn't that in OASIS? Why don't we then have the tick box exercise okay? And then why don't we have what then are the further questions we should be asking, or you think we should be asking, on the basis of your research, so that it's live. We're knowing what questions are being asked, we're knowing what questions, some of which are being in a research agenda or that are being answered, and then what then have we learned from your research, or have you learned from your research that means you think we should be asking further questions? So I think that would be a rather simple fix, actually.
Could I come back on that as well? Because I think that process of OASIS reporting should cover and has the opportunity to report on other forms of archaeological investigation. And I think that's only through these conversations can we find more opportunities of...
You need a really wide definition of archaeology.
Absolutely, and that was my point in the sense that we report on treasure trove finds, you know, so it relates to museum collections as well. And I think that's the kind of opportunity we have because of the research framework and the space we are occupying today is what information is useful for who and how do we work across a range of disciplinary demands and, I suppose, impacts that we're looking to make as well.
Just one thing to add, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of the research that could be done isn't necessarily place-based. So if the record's got to tie to a Canmore record or something, or an artefact in a museum, it might not naturally do that. So, you know, that's just a little bit of tweaking to be thinking about.
Thank you. There was a question in the back there as well, so if we can just take that as well.
It's a question relating specifically to Gavin's presentation, but would be interesting to hear from the whole panel. But you mentioned with participants who will be working with you with the Clyde Valley Archaeological Research Framework, you mentioned the commercial sector as one of those partners. What do you envision that kind of partnership looking like, or that work looking like?
To be honest, in the first instance, it is a proper conversation with you know, representatives from those organisations of fame to see how we can build on the kind of issues Andy's talked about and look at the kind of realities of what happens on the ground on a day-to-day basis. So really, from that kind of co-design process, I don't have the answer yet, but that's really the next step, I hope.
Hi, also for Gavin, but I think it would be interesting to see what you all kind of think in the context of the frameworks and how this can work is you mentioned decolonization very early on, but then you didn't talk about it in the rest of your presentation. And I was just interested if you could talk a bit more about how you see that fitting into the regional framework, and maybe also Alex and, you know, anybody else, how that might relate to, you know, future research in archaeology in Scotland, because it hasn't, I think you're the only person that mentioned it today, and that's obviously a kind of pertinent topic at the moment, so.
Again, it's at very early stages, and the aspiration is to work with groups who have lived experience, that how heritage manifests and how it's articulated, you know, currently is something we would want to explore. How further research in terms of collections or archaeological research, what we prioritise, the questions we ask can be formulated from a variety of different perspectives. And again, looking to the work that's been done by University of Glasgow, for example, and National Trust, then that we want to explicitly engage with that and build on that. But I don't know if that answers your question.
No? Or do you want to...
I was just going to say, we put our hands up and we say, you know, we've been really bad and we are way behind the curve on this, and we need all the help we can get here as well, because we are part of a capitalist white male system, and as organisations we need to address this across the board. And if we don't put our hands up now and go, you know, how are we going to work with communities who have been under-resourced and ignored as well, you know, and ScARF is one of many organisations who recognise this as well. But how we do that, we're going to need to learn together, definitely. So thank you for raising that.
No.
Just to use carved stones as an example, you might think about, if you're thinking about the biographies of monuments, you know, who owns them, how did they get the money to own what they, you know, to do what they did, and put these as move a stone and make it a garden feature or whatever. There's lots of different ways in which we just need to all be aware of these issues and bring them into the stories that we're trying to tell, and the questions therefore that we're asking.
It struck me as we've gone through the day that we've sort of moved from the original, talking about the original ScARF concept, which was a framework, a set of things that we think we know, things that we think we don't know, things that we don't know, and things that we'd like to know. And we're gradually throughout the day, and I think it's entirely reasonable, we're moving into an area which the original concept of ScARF deliberately excluded, which was agendas, agenda building. And I worry slightly that there is a possibility, and Sally's already touched on it, that as we link up all of our systems in ever cleverer ways, we could be restricting the range and character of the questions that we prioritize. And from that, I think there's a real risk that we end up restricting, in effect, the available array of answers which are permissible, or at least the language in which those answers are expressed, how do the panel think we could keep the, as it were, the sheer randomness of the disorganized past of archaeology going in the very productive way that it has been, so that things that you weren't expecting to find, Andy touched on this, you open the ground, you find something completely different. We need to really find ways of keeping that randomness factor alive and not saying, ah, yes, we can talk about that next week because it's not one of our priorities. How do we do that, keeping of the whole thing alive, current, and moving forward without restricting the fields of activity?
So I would say that OASIS, the technical stuff we've just seen, is just going to be one way to update ScARF. So obviously the original ScARF had the wiki comments function, which in theory anybody could have a login and put a comment in, an idea, a thought, a new question, share research they'd done. That didn't sort of work out in that most people didn't actually use that function, but that is still there and it is still available. So maybe that's something we need to promote more with the research frameworks we've already got, that, you know, it is anybody can contribute to it. It's not just the technical side. Obviously, the technical side is sort of designed more to, from what Andy was talking about earlier, to link the research questions with the work primarily through developmental archaeology. However, certainly in England, OASIS is used much more widely by the community archaeology groups than I think it is in Scotland. So I think something like 160 community groups have already been trained to use OASIS V in England as a way of reporting as well. So, I think everyone's aware that OASIS it does a particular thing in terms of feeding information, which has been carried out, feeding projects, and then dumping it all out the other end in places hopefully we can all find. But it's only one aspect of how we can sort of update ScARF in future.
Okay, so forget applied archaeology and forget that I was doing the MD thing of AOC. Actually, that presentation was great because, I think this makes perfect sense now. Regardless whether you're a community archaeologist, a university, or an applied archaeologist, go back to the John Barber statement. You should have a research question when you start your work. You don't just dig something, okay? Normally, you'd write that down. So Gordon Noble will write down 4 questions he wants to answer at Tapanoth. Alex will answer 3 research questions about looking at graffiti. We've got WSIs. So the key thing is defining your research question when you start your work. Doesn't matter what you're doing, or if it's a listed building, chamber, cairn. What doesn't happen currently in Scotland at the moment is that's clear what the research questions are when you start. And after seeing OASIS, and I'll come back to another example to make my point, that will force us to define our research questions, because you can't fill in these boxes unless you've actually, okay, you're filling in your research question at the end. We need to start making people do it at the start, which happens in England. I mean, this is dead easy, okay? So we need this system, and Davey and others who are asking me or whoever to do something regionally to define the research questions at the start. No, your point's well made, we can add ones later, but let's just get to the basic, yeah? There was a thing called HERDS in HS2, which is a 100-mile-kilometre railway. Now, it's dead easy in principle because the client is the government, who's the landowner, who's the government, and the curator is the government. So it's dead easy to do. In practice, it's quite difficult, but the theme's right. They developed a HERDS, it's called HERDS, Historic Environment Research Development Strategy. Every single WSI over the 80 kilometres had to define what research questions they were relating to. When they started, there was 196. It wasn't just Roman burials, it was about social value, use of LiDAR, geotechnical, contemporary archaeology. You've never read it, go and read it, because this is what you need to do. And then you had to answer it, an iterative process. Forget about getting curators down on site. I was just throwing that out there, but it defines research questions at the start of the project. They're then entering the post-excavation phase after 5 years, and they've realised that 197 research questions, now you can only answer 97. Okay? So it's an iterative process that you start. What we need to do is get you funded for 4 years to finish your regional stuff, and then get you and others more funded to then look at all the stuff that we fill in, and then update your research strategy, and it's dead easy. I mean, it's literally that simple. We've got now research things which are great. It'll have curatorial weight. You've already heard Davey and others saying we're going to use it as a planning tool. That means they'll force the biggest people of doing archaeology to define their research questions. They check them, it goes in there, it's modified. Doesn't matter if you're community archaeologist doing Ancram, Sally doing carved stones, contemporary archaeology, my colleagues in the room. We're actually getting there. We just need to accept that we were in the vision stage for 10 years. We're now in the implementation stage. It needs a new steering group with the voices we've heard to implement what you guys have done. It's dead easy. It's there. Thank God for Dan's presentation.